Hello and welcome to another episode of Café History. So today we're trying to understand a new concept. I'll link it to colonialism as our previous episode. Today, as a way to understand how colonialism affected people and different societies, probably it might be essential to look at works of literature. So today, with the help of Dr. Malki, we will explore Irish and Nigerian literatures in order to discuss colonialism. Dr. Maki, thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome to our talk.
My pleasure.
So, we can start today by talking about the example of Irish and Nigerian literature. So, my question would be to which extent did these literatures play the role in achieving respective independence for both Ireland and Nigeria?
Thank you, Rita. Yes, I think I would say that literature has always, stood as part of a historical process. And uh, there is a famous saying in Arabic which says that al-katibu bnu bay'atih. In other words, writers in general get really affected by their surroundings, by the historical, the cultural, the political context in which they're living. So that's why this notion of literature as a sort of means to, I would say, elevate people's understanding of what they are undergoing has always been the case. Sometimes, perhaps, when not being subject to any colonial period, people try to understand their societies through literature. I would cite Shakespeare, for example. I would cite some famous English writers who dealt with, sort of uh, decolonizing the mind of their peoples. And what I mean by this is that making them aware of their political, social, cultural, reality. When it comes to colonized countries like Morocco, like Ireland, and like Nigeria, I think that the role of literature has always been this: to decolonize people, to free their minds. And I'm doing again some research, and I noticed that this aspect is still going on because even after independence, we're still suffering from some what they refer to as neo-colonialism, and this now is being one of the objectives of literature in these countries. So they managed, of course, to push towards independence, but now they are also trying to push towards real independence, which means that we're trying to make people see that we're still colonized. And that's where, again, decolonizing the mind comes into play. And if we take, I will start from Morocco since most of us are Moroccan. I'll start from Morocco and refer you to famous writers like Karim Ghallab, for example, like uh, uh, other writers like Khnata bin Nuna, like many other writers. They, of course, wrote novels and they copied novels, of course, from the Western genre, but the content is always there. The content is always dealing with how, you know, the colonial period affected people, and in Morocco, how the French and the Spaniards affected the life of people. When it comes to Ireland, this is a different, I would say, a different case because Ireland has been the land of satire. I'm sure you've heard about Jonathan Swift, you've heard about Samuel Beckett, you've heard about, George Bernard Shaw. All these people were, or well, yes, they all were, they're all dead. They were within Ireland as a colonized country, and we know that it took quite a long time for Ireland, for Northern Ireland mainly, to free itself, to have that independence, and this was mainly done through famous works. in a different way, I would say, which is mainly relying on Irish identity, mainly relying on symbols which we use from within the Irish culture, rather than using British symbols, etc. So that's why you will find, for example, J.M. Singh, the one I will perhaps talk a little bit more later. J.M. Singh had always refused to have this intertextuality with Shakespeare, with Milton, with those big literary figures, and he tried mainly to focus on something that really pertains to Ireland. And this was done, I think, in the tradition of the satirical literary genre, which I think is something that was developed in Ireland actually, because uh, uh, Irish writers could not write openly against the British. So they found ways of using satire, and I'm sure you've read Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Have you read Gulliver's Travels? That's one of the biggest and the most, I would say, exquisite novels you can read about the symbolic use of literary genres in order to free the mind of people. When it comes to Nigeria, I think there is a different, again, there is a different context in the sense that Nigerian writers, mainly Shoinka, Achebe, and some other African writers who followed within the same trend, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, like other writers, even from the French-speaking countries like Léopold Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire. They all had one major objective, which is how to make people aware that colonialism has to go away. And later on, with Shoinka and with Achebe, they even went further in the sense that they no longer were talking about, military decolonization or the freedom of Nigeria militarily and politically speaking, but they also tried to elaborate more on how we can free, and I said it earlier, how we can free the mind of the African in this sense. So uh, uh, if you go to novels by Achebe, you will find that most of the themes dealt with is this connection, or this, I would say, a relationship, though it is a sort of conflictual relationship between the natives, the indigenous people, and of course the British colonial power in this sense. We can also say the same thing with Shoinka, especially in his critical writings, but in his creative writings, things are completely different because he used a lot of satire and he adopted the Irish satire. So he used mainly the technique used by Samuel Beckett in the way he used language and in the way he mixed orality with a written medium, because we know that Africa has no tradition in writing novels, in writing plays, etc. So it relied on the orality of the culture, and it mixed it with, I would say, the written medium, mainly plays and novels. Poetry is also, I think, a tradition in Africa. So all these, and I don't want to go into details concerning specific novels, specific plays, and characters, but I can come back to this perhaps in my dealing with some literary works by Shoinka and by Singh.
Thank you so much, Professor. So our next question is, how does the power of language in Irish and Nigerian drama portray the colonial history of these countries respectively, or yeah, as in parallel with Moroccan colonialism, for example?
Yes, I think that language is, I would say, the umbrella strategy through which one expresses ideas. And when I refer to language in my research, most of the time I try to associate it with what we call non-verbal, means of communication. But language is very important. And I still have in mind one of Achebe's famous sayings. He says that, for example, the use of proverbs, which is a highly linguistic, strategy. The use of proverbs is like the palm oil with which words are swallowed and ideas are swallowed. So the oral language is highly exploited in Nigerian works. In I would say even in Moroccan works, we will always find that orality is dominating. Unlike, for example, Irish literature, wherein the tradition of a written medium has always existed, but with the African in general, and when I say African, I also include Arab literature in general. It is highly based on the orality of the language, and if we, I think it will be a waste of time for you if I go to certain passages, for example, in Arrow of God or in Kongi's Harvest, Shoinka's famous play Kongi's Harvest, or even in The Lion and the Jewel, in Shoinka's works. The Lion and the Jewel is a very good example of how language sometimes does not reveal to what extent we became independent, but sometimes it reveals to what extent we're still colonized. And what, if you go, it's a very short play, if you could read it, perhaps for your future reference. It's a very short play which deals with the role of women, the notion of gender equity and gender equality, but at the same time, it deals with how the westernized people sometimes are dangerous on the way we're tending to free ourselves. So we will find Lakunle, for example, who is the school teacher who is trying to imitate Shakespearean language. And all the village people, of course, satirize this attitude and ironize it to a large extent by showing that Lakunle is just using words, but what we need is actions in order to free the people. So language expresses this idea that sometimes we don't need only language, we need action. And this is done through mainly, as I said, the idea of using specific turns of phrases, which is purely African. Again, if you read Tayyibun by Mubarak Rabi', you will notice the same thing. You will notice that the language the characters are using has no equivalent actually in the written medium, but it has an equivalent in the oral culture of Moroccans, and the same thing happens when we deal with Nigerian writers in general. But the Irish is different, though again, if you read the Playboy of the Western World, a play by J.M. Singh, you will notice that the hero, Christie, manages to dominate the mind of people just through fiction, through imagination, through language. And this again proves again that language is the main tool through which we can express a lot of ideas, either directly or indirectly. We can go into this. And in this, what I did
Yes,
actually,
Professor.
I'm sorry, yes.
Just to go back to your first point, thank you so much. But you said that you could read some excerpts or a few lines to give us an idea of how colonialism reshaped these literatures, and I think that all of us would be interested in hearing some briefly, just to be in the same perspective as yours.
Yes, I will try and read some passages. Well, just a very short passage.
Yes, thank you.
So this is from the Lion's Jewel, uh, where, of course, because I mentioned the idea of mythologizing the body, and in this play, I think it is the culmination of Shoinka's art in showing how the body is given a great importance, and that's what I call creating a myth out of a body. And if you read again the play, you will notice this. But I will just come to the passage. I'm sorry.
No, take your time.
So here, Lakunli, of course, is trying to convince Sidi, who is the village beauty, to marry him because he is a modernist and he is someone who doesn't behave like other African, people, especially when we compare Lakunle with Danlola, who is, of course, the elder of the village, and he is about 80, and he also wants to marry Sidi, who is about 18 or 19 years of age. And this, of course, conflict between Lakunle and the elder person is very interesting. And Lakunle, of course, is trying to, as I said, convince uh, uh, Sidi in order to marry him, but without a dowry. And we know how important this notion of dowry is in African cultures and in Arab culture in general. So what she says to him is, they will say I was no virgin, that I was forced to sell my shame and marry you without a price. Without a price means without a dowry. And what Lakunli says, a savage custom, barbaric, outdated, rejected, denounced, accursed, excommunicated, archaic, degrading, humiliating, unspeakable, redundant, retrogressive, remarkable, unpalatable. And Sidi ironically answers him, is the bag empty? Why did you stop? So this scene, and Lakunle, of course, again satirically says, I own only the shorter companion dictionary, but I have ordered the longer one. You wait. Which means that what he's doing is that he's learning certain expressions by heart, and he thinks that because of these expressions, because of showing that he masters the English language, he will convince Sidi to marry him. Though he is poor, he has no real income, but the Baroka, the elder character, is old. He already married 8 women, but he has a lot of money and he can make her live more comfortably, etc. Of course, that's again the satirical side in Shoinka, is that he is trying to challenge the mind of his audiences by showing again this dichotomous position of young people in African countries. Are we to imitate the West, or should we stick to our own cultures? Should we again stick to traditions like the woman, of course, the CD in this case, will always try to marry a rich person, a rich husband, or a sort of modernist person, but with no source of income and with no real comfort, etc. So the whole play is full of these, and there are various passages in Shoinka. Most of his plays I would say, play on this kind of language, satirical, but at the same time, very harshly criticizing both attitudes. And that's why I said that the problem now is no longer with decolonizing Africa economically and politically and militarily, but it's mainly decolonizing Africa from this hegemony, I would say, of the Western culture, of how we use these symbolic behavior on the part of certain people who think they are educated, they are westernized, etc. So the notion again of decolonizing, I think, is present in almost all Shoinka's works. Yes, any other?
Doctor,
Yes,
I see. We get that how you explained the power, how the power of language can express how we can how the authors try to decolonize Africa, how sticking to the traditions can be a way of decolonizing Africa that not necessarily uh, because the West is maybe more modern than us, that we should stick to its to traditions of the West. We can see we can see the power of language in expressing that. But you talked earlier about how African literature was stick mostly to the orality. I have two questions. The first question is, isn't this orality of language the way that made a lot of literature works made them disappear for us today? I mean, for example, let's take the Amazigh tales, Amazigh traditions, Amazigh myths.
In mythologies, yeah.
Yeah, for once I tried to ask my grandmother if she knows about the myth of Anzar, and she told me she has never heard of it. She only knows that Anzar means the rain. I think I would say isn't the reason why uh, we kind of lost our traditional our cultural literature is because of the orality of how these literature was made. And
Yeah.
my second question is related to what you were explaining. You were giving us great examples of the power of language. I would love to ask you, is there any other elements that are unique in the Nigerian, in the African literature or the Irish literature that that show this that were used to show the decolonization in literature? So maybe the concept of the hero and anti-hero, rhetorical manipulations. Thank you.
thank you, Ayman. So, thank you for raising these two questions, and most importantly, the first one. Uh, uh, when we talk about the orality of language, and this is, I think, what these writers are doing, is that these writers managed to extrapolate the purely oral culture into an oral culture that is written. And that's what African literature is doing, actually. Uh, are you reading Tahar bin Jalloun's novels? Have you read Haruda, for example? No. So
I haven't had the chance.
yeah.
Do
So
tell us about them, please.
Please.
Tahar bin Jalloun did a great job at a certain stage of his literary career, during which, of course, he used his oral culture, we know that he's coming from Fez, and Fez, of course, is known for, its poetry, its cultural and oral aspects, and he managed to translate these. And this translation is what saves quite a lot of oral cultures. And uh, issue was raised, I would say, for those pioneers, I would call them, in African literature, mainly Leopold Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire, Ayikwe Arma, other writers like Shoinka we are dealing with, and like Achebe, is that they had this, I would say, this dilemma of if we are saying we are writing African literature, shouldn't it be in an African dialect? And that's a big question. And Wat Yongo, the Ghanaian writer, opted first because he studied in England, so he started writing in English. But once he came back to Ghana, he started writing in Swahili and Kiswahili. These are two dialects that have been revived actually thanks to these writers. But the problem again is that the readership was highly limited. Not many people could read Swahili, for example. Not many people could read Tamazight, since you mentioned Tamazight. Now, I think with the Amazigh Institute for Cultural, Development, the IRCAM in Rabat, they are doing the same thing, but they are doing it, I would say, in a scientific way, which is that of saving orality through writing these. Some will opt for writing it in Tifinagh, though how many people write and read Tifinagh? I'm a Berber, I'm an Amazigh, but I cannot read. I tried really very hard, to be frank with you, but I found it really hard to decipher the Tifinagh and to write in Tifinagh. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to translate what I know of the Amazigh culture into Arabic or French or English. And this is what was, I would say, made as a choice by Shoinka and Achebe mainly, because Shoinka and Achebe tried to seek, a sort of universality in the way they are dealing with issues in African life in general, in African reality. And the idea then of, yes, there is a risk if we don't know how to archive the oral tradition in our cultures, then we will lose quite a huge part of our own identity. I do agree with you on this. But now things are changing, thanks mainly to a lot of writers, as Achebe, for example. If you read Achebe's Things Fall Apart, you will notice that most of the turns of phrases are not English at all. The English reader will not understand what Achebe is saying, but an African reader who knows English will understand, because Achebe takes directly from the oral culture and translates it into English. And that's what perpetuates this culture. And that's why now we have more and more, Nigerian cultural aspects being saved thanks to these works. The other, I would say, chance now we're having is now we've got a lot of new technologies. So that's what now we're trying to do. I'm sure if you go to just Google Islan, for example, which is an Amazigh term for songs, you will notice that a lot of people are doing a great job in recording, oral productions, songs, and in Shed, for example, in Shed, which means a troubadour, that's the initial meaning of it. but now it's more of a sort of a poet. And these in Shedden don't write their poems. They just create them and memorize them. And if this poet dies, the 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 heritage dies with him and her, because we've got also some female in Shedden. So this issue, I think, is very important, and I thank you, Ayman, for raising this question, because we need to do something and we need to work in this sense. So that's why now you will find that some Moroccan writers are writing in English, but they are just transliterating sort of words and expressions from Tamazight, from Moroccan Arabic into English, so that you can perhaps study it as a written literary form. So that's the first question. The idea of the uniqueness, of course, um, Irish, and it was followed into this by African dramatists mainly, especially Shoinka. In Shoinka, we will never have the notion of the hero. The hero disappeared completely, unlike Western drama, unlike Shakespeare, unlike those famous dramatists, Johnson, etc., where the notion of heroism is based on the Greek sense of tragedy or comedy. Heroism, according to Greek tragedy, is always ending with the death of the hero, and that's the real hero, because he sacrifices him or herself for the good of others, and that's a sense of hero. In African drama, mainly, the notion of heroism has disappeared. Again, even in novels, if you read Arrow of God, you will notice that the hero is no hero at all, but he is a hero in the sense that he understands the situation, he reacts to it, and he sticks to his position till the end. Because again, the hero in Arrow of God is someone who has been rejected from his tribe because he showed sort of disrespect to an English officer, and of course he could not bear this. He could not bear this idea of being rejected, and he was, famous for his fighting against enemies in general. We know how the tribal system works in Nigeria, and he could not, of course, react to this. And he was given the possibility to again go back to his tribe, because the officer pardoned him, and this made him perhaps more and more rejecting his situation. And what he did is that he killed himself, and killing oneself in Greek tragedy is no heroism. So in Nigerian drama in general, Soyinka, I think, represented the notion of anti-heroism. So we have heroes, but not in the traditional sense. We have heroes in a very different sense. Like, for example, Sidi in The Land of the Jewel, from which I read that passage. Sidi is seen as the heroine, but she is no heroine at all, because normally she should go with modernist ideas. She should go with Lakunle, with the teacher, not with the old Bale who is 80, who already married 8 women, and who is rich, etc. So choosing to marry Baroka at the end shows that Sidi is no hero at all, though she is referred to in the title as a jewel. The lion is Baroka, and the jewel is Sidi, is the young woman. So this idea of heroism, I think, has been destroyed, and this is mainly due to, again, a new wave in drama, even in the West. Instead of this dichotomy between tragedy and comedy, as we see it in Greek drama, Western drama has, I would say, developed a new way of dealing with, again, the notion of heroism. And that's what we call a tragi comedy. This is a new genre now, or subgenre, I would call it, in drama in general. So you will find a lot of tragicomedies, not within, of course, the Western tradition, but within mainly the Western tradition that were subject to colonialism. And this we will find mainly in Irish drama. Read George Bernard Shaw. I think you can even watch their plays because they are now on videos. Watch Samuel Beckett. Uh, have you read Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot? A very short play. I'm sure you hear this expression. I'm waiting for Godot.
Yeah, I haven't had the chance, but I think it's waiting for something that will never come.
will never come. Exactly. And again, this is the reference to this notion of anti-heroism, because what Western culture tells us is that we always have a hero in mind. We understand the world thanks to heroes, but this is no longer the case. Now we've got a lot of anti-heroes who really behave in a completely different way, but they are, I would say, they are triggers of change and of, again, freedom and independence within the mind of African people in general. So that's what I can talk about. I have a whole part on heroism. If you want me, I can send you. I have a whole chapter in a book concerning heroism and anti-heroism. I can share with you perhaps later on.
Yes, that would be amazing. And I remember we've been asked by some members who were watching last time to include some of the references for them for extended information about what we're talking about. So that would be amazing. Um, I want to talk next about, I want to go back to the question raised by Ayman and that you have answered. And I just want to start a discussion about as someone as for writers, uh, what should they focus on when they're tackling this problem of trying to maintain their traditions and their culture and history alive through their writings? Should they focus more on keeping the traditions or keeping the language itself with its structures, because we know that language differ and the structure of languages can give us an idea about what this language survived. So what is more important here is to keep the tevinar and keep the language as a whole alive, even though people do not read with it, or try to focus more on the Amazigh society and write in different languages to make it alive in different readers around the world. And I just want to add to this question the fact that works of literature have become, or art in general, including cinema, for example, and theater, have become very commercialized. So we would expect in literature and cinema things that are not historically correct just for the purpose of entertainment and bring in more views to get more money. So, as someone who writes or someone who makes movies in general, what do you think we should focus on more?
Yes, a very pertinent question, Rita, because I think this is, I would say, the essence of the survival of literature nowadays. Uh, we need, as I would say, as sorry, I don't want to use these terms a lot, but we need as intellectuals uh, uh, to find a way actually, and we cannot find it if we do not go back to, again, the canons, if we do not go back to people who started thinking about this. But you said it, because of now the proliferation, not even of cinema. I think movie going and theater going is something that disappeared now. Uh, uh, During my student years in the 70s, we used to to belong to what we call a cine club. I don't know to what extent you're familiar with this institution. Cine club means that we as students uh, used to go to the movies, at least once a week, and we used to gather after the movie, after the show, and we used to discuss the movie from various aspects, from the technical aspect, from the notion of characterization, the use of music, the use of colors, etc. And this is what prepares us in order to read, I would say, the way a work of literature should be read. Because yes, some people read for pleasure, for entertainment, but if we want things to develop, I think we need more people like you, people who will know how to analyze and who know these different theories in analyzing works of art. And I had in mind this huge, again, issue concerning, are we writing literature for the sake of literature, or are we writing it for another objective? That's what used to be called art for art's sake. I'm sure you've heard about this. And should art be committed? To my mind, art should be committed. We cannot write for art's sake because it helps in, I would say, just having an indolent, you know, attitude towards what is art. When I say art, I mean literature, I mean painting, I mean movies, I mean music, etc. So this idea of, again, keeping the tradition should be addressed to people who know how to approach these works of literature. I don't know. An example in mind, I was discussing with my students on Friday, my critical thinking class. We were talking about this idea of evaluating a work without having read it or even without watching it as a movie. And we talked about movies, and we raised the issue of Much Love. Do you know this? Have you heard about this movie by no, I forgot.
نبيل عيوش
Nabil
نبيل
Ayoush.
عيوش
So people started reacting to it without having even had a view of one or two scenes of it. And this is the danger. That's why I said we need to keep the tradition. And what I mean by the tradition is, let me first read the work, let me watch it, and then I can react to it. And I should not react to it in any way. And that's where, again, critical thinking comes into play. We need to approach it according to certain conventions, to certain rules. And this can be done only through academia. That's why I always focus on this idea of the importance of studentship. Students are the legislators of the world, as Keats said, a famous romantic poet, a British romantic poet. He said that writers are the legislators of the world. It means that writers and artists are the ones who create laws. And I add to this and say that students should be the legislators of the world, because they are the ones that would bring change to our societies. And we cannot bring change by just reading things for entertainment, for pleasure. No, we need to read these things with a certain objective in mind. How can we change our societies? And when, for example, our writers, Moroccan, African in general, write, they have this dilemma again. Are we writing for a literate society or an illiterate society? And this is our problem in Morocco and in Africa in general, is that we're still suffering from illiteracy. So the way we should approach so many aspects should always try and accommodate itself to a certain reality. Unlike the Irish, while doing my research, I was in Ireland and I stayed in the Abbey Theatre in Ireland for 45 days, and I noticed that there was two presentations every night of Irish plays. Every night, two presentations in the Abbey Theatre, and this, of course, is what makes the difference. Is that these people write, and they know their audience will get affected, will understand the message. But in Africa, most of us do not understand the message because of this notion of illiteracy. What I mean by illiteracy is not knowing how to read and write. No, I think now most of our population knows how to read and write. We decipher, script. But illiteracy means that we need to go beyond, and we need to not only accept what we receive, we absorb what we receive, but we need to react to it, and we need to evaluate, analyze it first, and evaluate it and see what can be done in order to, of course, use it for the benefit of our societies in general. And that's what literature is meant to do, actually. So in the past, it was trying to fight for independence through various ways. Now we are within, I would say, a new fight, a new war, which is that, of course, against illiteracy, not again in the way we understand it, against indolence, intellectual indolence, against being passive receivers of what we do. The risk now is getting bigger because of, again, social media and how social media affects us in general. So that's why I think when dealing with Tamazight, since that was your last point, Rita, when dealing with Tamazight, I think we have, again, to find a better way of archiving this oral culture, but also making it a way of keeping an identity. And it's part now of Moroccan identity. No one can say no. Even the new constitution, the 2011 constitution, stresses this. Moroccan culture is diverse. It is Arab, it is Tamazight, it is Hassani, it is Jewish, it is all these things. So the role of the writer then, as far as I'm concerned, the role of the writer now in Morocco is to highlight this variety, which is a richness, actually. At a certain stage, you couldn't talk about Tamazight, you couldn't talk about Berber culture. I'm sure you understand what I mean by this. During a certain period, no one could raise the issue of Tamazight. Now, I think we have this possibility. We are within a sort of a democratizing process, I would say, in our country. So we need to see the role of literature within this. And it is a historical context, which I talked about earlier. Each literary production is, I would say, the outcome or the output of a whole literary context. Now, we no longer suffer from colonialism, but we're suffering from other types of colonialism. We're suffering from other types of, I would say, misinformation, disinformation, etc. So that's why I say that going back to your idea of concerning Tamazight and the notion of tradition, I think we need to keep within this tradition and go back to the real literary sense of what we are producing, and only, I would say, learned people should deal with this and explain it to others. Let us not let anyone explain to us what he or she perhaps even doesn't understand. I mentioned Much Love, as an example. I can mention many other, poems and novels and plays, etc., which I think could be approached in a different way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melki, for answering the questions we raised so far. I think it's time for us to take a look at our audience's questions and comments.
Sure.
Thank you. So the first one is by Rashid. So he says, thank you very much for this academic endeavor. And his question is about the question of language. His question is about the question of language in post-colonial or decolonial literature, especially in Nigeria.
Yes, uh, I think that this, I mentioned it, this is a big issue for writers, mainly the pioneers in writing what we refer to as African literature. What is African literature? That's a big question asked by a lot of writers. Is it literature written in African languages, African dialects? I think now the question is no longer valid in the sense that if you want your literary field to, I would say, gain a sort of larger audiences, we need to write in a cosmopolitan language. And Shoinka, and later on Achebe, Shoinka, of course, is considered, I would say, a literary figure, a critic, a poet, a dramatist, but also an activist in this sense. So even I mentioned Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who, when he came back to Africa from England, he started writing in Swahili, but no one could read him. So now, he died, I think, quite a long time ago. But before his death, he came to the conviction that English is, I would say, the means or the tool through which African literature can develop. Uh, and the best example I can give is, again, Shoinka's getting the Nobel Prize in 1986. He got it not because of writing in any other language, but in writing in English. Because he was read by world critics, he was evaluated by world critics, and of course, they found out that his works are really worth reading, and he was worth the Nobel Prize. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I think, is a great writer, but because of this attitude towards language, he, I would say, wasted quite a lot of time. He came back to English, I would say, at a later stage in his life. The issue then is that we cannot really own a sort of world recognition if we write in limited dialects. The issue in Morocco, I think, is different because Morocco is part of the Arab world, and Arabic is, I would say, a rich language, is a language that is fully fledged, I would say, and which is used, and now it is translated in various other languages. But in other countries, like African countries, for example, just in Nigeria, in 1986-87, there were more than 1,500 languages just in Nigeria alone. And every day, 2 or 3 languages just die and disappear. We cannot really, I would say, have a literary tradition if we base ourselves on these dialects. Sometimes you find one tribe speaking a dialect and not speaking any other dialect or any other language. That's why, politically, I would say speaking, the decision was made as to, for example, opting for English as the national language in Nigeria. I think this decision was not an easy one to take, but it was a necessary one. In Senegal, the same thing happened. Senegal has opted again for French as its national language. It has various other dialects, but the language that could perhaps uh, uh, make not only the literary field thrive, but also when we talk about now business in general, about tourism, about technology, I think whether we like it or not, English is gaining ground. So English can be, I would say, a source of richness again. Though, as I said, in Morocco, in the Arab world, we have a different situation, which is that of Arabic. Arabic is completely different. But in Nigeria, for example, now technologically, politically, economically, and literarily, can we say this? Nigeria is gaining ground, I would say, over other countries in Africa in general. Have I answered this question, or?
Yes, I think, yeah. Um, we have another question from Monsif. He says, what do you think about adding local worlds into our decolonization works, words that are attached to our cause? It won't be interesting. It won't be an interesting thing for the global reader. I mean, I think he is asking, wouldn't it be an interesting thing for the global reader?
Adding local words into our decolonization works. This reminds me of an attempt uh, made about 3 years ago by, again, Nordin Ayush, the father of Nabil Ayush. Have you followed what happened in Morocco?
Is it the one where he tried to nationalize Darija in our educational courses?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And what the textbook designers did is that they started, inserting certain words in the language textbooks, in the Arabic language textbooks, and there were quite a lot of reactions to this, against it, of course. And they said that, well, Darija is something we use daily, so there is no fear that it will disappear. What we fear perhaps may disappear is the written language, the classical language, is French, is English. We are learning. I'm referring to this because these are languages we are exposed to in Morocco. So when if we opt for introducing certain words, isolated words, I wouldn't go for this. I wouldn't say it will solve the problem. I would say, let's write in Darija. Definitely. Let's write novels in Darija. Some writers, and I have in mind Miludi Shghmoum, a famous Moroccan writer, a philosopher and a writer, who experienced with this. He experienced with writing in, I would say, standard Arabic, which is the Arabic we use in media, in newspapers, in our official correspondences, etc. And Darija. And what he did is he tried, of course, to make whole passages just in Darija. And they found some positive reaction. But some traditionalists, again, and some purists said that, no, we'd rather write either in Arabic or in Darija. So if you want to write in Darija, just go ahead. No one will say no. And if you want to write in Arabic, do it. If you want to write in French, do it. Though, and I will come to my earlier idea concerning this notion of translating culturally from a language into another can also be a richness. But I am not using Darija. I am just translating literally from Darija into English, into French, and sometimes even into Arabic. This is what Miludi Shghmoum did, is that he took certain very specific Darija expressions and he tried sometimes to translate them. Well, though translation doesn't work in this sense, but he sort of transposed them into into standard Arabic. But this is still, I think, a big issue. My standpoint is, let us deal with one aspect at a time. If we want to write in classical Arabic, so let's focus on classical Arabic. Let's master classical Arabic. If we want to write in English, let's master English. If we want to write in Darija, let's write in Darija, but fully, writing fully in Darija, not mixing, these aspects. Perhaps I'm a classicist again in this, but uh, uh, you perhaps in future episodes you may ask certain young researchers who will perhaps develop this idea. Why not? Why not mix the whole thing? Within our written medium, which is Arabic sometimes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malki, for your insights and your input on this question. It's actually reminded me of some points that I've had people mention in other discussions, where it's funny how whenever we try to discuss Moroccan literature, we somehow always end up discussing the medium, which is language itself, instead of the content.
Yeah.
Whereas the main aspect of anti or post-colonial literature worldwide is usually mainly centered on the content, on plots, characters, the goal of the book or the poetry or whatever we choose to write. But somehow in Morocco, I don't know why we always tend to focus on which language are we going to use and how do we plan on using it. I don't know if you've also crossed this cycle, or if you have any comment on this.
Yeah, yes, Rihab. I think you're right. Sometimes we deviate from the most important aspect in a literary work, in a movie, and we start talking about the periphery. Language is only a medium. So write in whatever language you like, but just give me good substance, give me good ideas. This is my position. So if you write in Tamazight, I will try and read you. If you write in Darija, I will try and read you. If you write in English, I will try and read you. Why? Because I'm not interested in the means of expression, in the language per se, but I'm more interested in the content, in the substance. And sometimes we forget that we write literature because of the ideas, not because of language. If you want to show how masterful you are of a language, then you have other ways, but not saying I'm writing a novel about this, or a play about this, or a poem about this. I think this is my opinion again.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor. I think that we could elaborate further on how the issue of classism also comes into play when it comes to the medium of language in Morocco. And that's also a discussion that we kind of touched on with Dr. Kabil last live. So I think this was it for us, right?
I think we managed to, like, we had a list of questions for this live, but for some reason we managed to get you to talk about everything, like answer everything in just 3 or 4 questions at the beginning. So we've elaborated about most of the things we wanted to get, and we even got to ask questions that we didn't even plan for. And the most important thing was to relate things to the Moroccan context, which is something very important to us at Cafe History. And for that, we thank you so much for your time and your insight for today and everything you shared with us and our audience. If you have any last words to share with us, or any conclusion or summary.
I would like to thank you all, Ayman, Rihab, and Rita, and also your audience. And that, as I said before, this is an opportunity for me to again revise certain, convictions I had in the past, but which I no longer practice because of changes in academia in general. So we're more and more into other aspects. of course, that would serve, I would say, our future, graduates, etc. So that's why I'm really pleased to come back to these days, and I think what you are doing is a great job. I would encourage you, and please feel free to get in touch whenever you have a topic on which I can also say a word. Uh, that's my nature. Uh, I can speak on things I know, uh, unlike those experts nowadays all over the world. I'm sorry I had to say this, but sometimes I get really hurt when I see people I know speaking about things they definitely do not master. So I hope I managed to give you an idea about your questions and about the issues you are raising. And thank you very much once again, and hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Maki. With this, we end our episode and thank our audience for their time and questions. Goodbye and see you in the next episode.
Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye.